In 1996, I made the top 8 of the Southern California Regionals. It was probably my best performance at a major Magic the Gathering tournament, and yes, that was probably because Necropotence was one of the most busted cards of all time. So when it came time to make an EDH deck that captured the feel of Necro Summer, I had to ask the question, could I make a commander deck with Necropotence in the command zone? It was Necro Summer, and I had out-teched my fellow Necropotence players by running 4 Mishra's Factories and 4 Strip Mines. It turned out the real tech was running more than 21 land in a 60-card deck. Who knew? So I had always been on the lookout for an EDH deck that mirrored some of that deck. Then one day, the Brothers War blessed us with Gix Yawgmoth Praetor. While it isn't exactly Necropotence in the command zone, it's not far from it. It's 3 mana value. Necropotence is a 3 mana value. On both, you pay 1 life and draw 1 card. And you know, they're both, black cards, I guess? At this point in the deck building process, I try to visualize how my board looks and what I'm doing in a game where the deck is performing about average. For Gix, I see 3 routes. The first being an evasive or go wide strategy that gets you a lot of card draws from Gix's first ability. Then parlaying that insane card advantage into an explosive win con. Secondly, you could twist the first ability, but in more of a group hug style, discouraging people attacking you, enticing people to attack the other players at the reward of a card. This is kind of like a poisonous pillow fort. The last option is off the second ability. Get a lot of cards into your hand, pay 7 and discard them, and you'll get to cast a bunch of free spells from your opponent's decks. I know I want this deck to be aggressive. I want to be turning little creatures sideways and drawing cards for 1 life. Gets a little murky after that. You see, I have a problem when deck building. I like having a specific goal or strategy in mind, building around that, but then also including a very small package of cards I consider a plan B. 5 to 10 cards that I can wield like a scalpel and try to outmaneuver my opponents if they hard counter my deck. In reality, these cards usually make me stumble in the early game, but I still like to feel clever by doing this. Plan A? Creature-based pressure that allows me to draw into bigger mana ramp and finish the game off with a big X spell. Plan B, just put Vorpal Sword on a dummy that my opponents can't block. The deck will be based around having cheap evasive creatures to power card draw through Gix. You can mix and match how you see fit, but I'll break down my personal ranking for evasion. Unblockable is unblockable, and that makes it the best. Horsemanship. There are like 12 cards in the entire game of Magic that have horsemanship, which means this is about as close to unblockable as possible without being unblockable. Unfortunately, there aren't a ton of good horsemanship creatures. Shadow is like horsemanship, which makes sense if you think about it because Shadow is such a great name for a horse. There are more cards with Shadow than horsemanship, so it is a little bit worse. Also, Dauthi Voidwalker is very popular and you'll see it from time to time. It can mess up your attack phase a little bit, but it's nothing major. Early in the game, flying is really good. It lets you get your creatures in above mana dorks. Unfortunately, flying is in every freaking color now, so every deck has access to it. It's good, not great. Fear would be really great if not for the increase of artifact creatures and artifact creature generators over the last couple years. It is nice, but just kind of nice. Menace doesn't provide any definitive level of unblockability. But early in the game, you can usually find a player or two where Menace essentially means unblockable. Landwalk is very nice, but for mono-black creatures that are cheap, you're basically limited to Plague Beetle or Zodiac Rat. I think I would generally prefer a more universal evasion. I would not play Skulk, because I wouldn't want to rely on any evasion that can be stymied by a 1/1 token. You won't find that in Commander anywhere, right? Death Touch doesn't actually give you any evasion, but it does provide a disincentive to block. Also see my previous section about Skulk and being stonewalled by a 1/1. We'll start with a group of low mana value evasive creatures. Tormented Soul and Changeling Outcast are the top of the class. 1 mana and unblockable. You can't beat 100%. Waste Scout is as close to unblockable as you can get. It's nay unblockable. I know it's actually nigh unblockable, but I said nay because of the horsemanship stuff. And horses neigh, let's just move on. Dauthi Horde, Dauthi Slayer, and Nether Trader are the classic package of 2-drop shadow creatures. I also run Dauthi Voidwalker, but I count him as an evasion plus card. We'll get to those in a bit. Prickly Bogart is a pretty solid option. While fear can be counteracted with artifact creatures, those usually don't show up in the first few turns. That can provide enough time for Prickly Bogart to get his work done. Ginger Brute is a unique case, as it really doesn't have any evasion, but it does have an ability that gives it near horsemanship levels of evasion. Battlefly Swarm, Vault Scourge, Sturge, Nightshade Stinger, and Eye Collector are all variations on 1 mana flyers. There are other of these out there, so feel free to adjust how you see fit or replace any other cards in this section. Vampire of the Dire Moon is the weakest of the pure evasion creatures. I run it because I've honestly never used it anywhere else, so this might be its best case scenario for me. Lifelink can also help as you do spend life when you draw cards with Gix, so I guess that's okay. Evasion Plus is low mana value creatures with evasion and a potential utility effect. Pilfering Imp is one of those 1 mana value 1/1 flyers, but it can also remove a card from someone's hand after a tutor or after having something bounce back to their hand. Blinkmoth Nexus is technically a land, in addition to being a 1/1 flyer. Basilica Screecher is a flyer that can help recoup some of the life lost from Gix, and a lot of cheap creatures and lots of card draw. The Extort can really take big chunks out of your opponent's life total. Black Bloom Rogue helps to make sure you hit your land drops and can be a favorable beater in the late game, while Forsworn Paladin can provide mana outside of combat. Cabal Therapist is kind of dodgy, but you never know. From time to time, you'll be able to pick up that a player has something like Cyclonic Rift or Wrath of God, and you can really nail them with that. Foulmire Knight is okay, and it's largely there because you can get a pseudo cycle and can trigger Extort twice with 1 card. Ashnod Flesh Mechanist isn't super evasive, but has an interesting ability, allowing you to sacrifice creatures to make Power Stones. While you can't use these incredibly well, they will power Ashnod's second ability, and can help getting out some of the artifacts you have in your deck without having to spend your precious black mana. I run a bit less ramp in this deck than I do on average, but this deck has a pretty low average mana value and I think it can get away with it. First up are Soul Ring and Arcane Signet. I round out the artifact ramp with Charcoal Diamond, Thought Vessel, and Mind Stone. Thought Vessel will help you when you start drawing 4 or 5 cards a turn with Gix. Mind Stone is nice to have just in case you've stalled out. And Charcoal Diamond, it's a 2 mana accelerator, and honestly I like the Mirage version of these diamonds, so I use them when I can. Dark Ritual isn't a permanent ramp, but it does let me get to certain big spells when I need, or drop extra creature spells before I cast Gix on curve. Bubbling Muck is similar, but you generally want to use it for a big X spell or to get a Gix activation out of nowhere. Soldevi Adnate isn't really a great mana dork, but it could be used to generate a bit of mana in response to a board wipe, and it is just such a cool looking card. I can't not run it here. If you don't have any affinity for the card, just don't run it. Speaking of board wipes, we do run a couple, even though we are a predominantly creature heavy deck. Damnation is your standard Wrath of God, nothing fancy here. The Meat Hook Massacre works well because we do have creatures and they will die, so this functions as both a board wipe and a potential game winner. Infernal Harvest borders the line between board wipe and interaction. It's mostly there to juice up a late game Gix second ability, but in a pinch it can be used to remove particular nuisances. Another card that can juice up a Gix second ability is Invoke Despair. This card sits somewhere between interaction and card draw, though I think of it more as interaction as you can choose when to use it and what type of result you'll want. A mini board wipe for 1 player or draw 3. Dokuchi Silencer is something I'm testing right now. An alternate here is Throat Slitter, but given that Silencer can be played naturally as a 2/1 dork for 2 mana, it gets the nod here. Malakir Rebirth helps smooth out the land draws much like Black Bloom Rogue, but it can also work as a limited efficiency counterspell, or a board wipe evasion. Feed the Swarm is starting to feel like a chore, though it's probably still warranted in any mono black deck. I won't say it's Soul Ring levels of boring, but it's not super exciting either. Infernal Grasp is just a solid creature removal. Oubliette can get rid of pesky things, and yes, that includes commanders. I generally try to avoid the feel bads that causes unless it's absolutely necessary. I run a small reanimation package. Call of the Death Dweller works well with the small mana value creatures I have, and will provide additional levels of evasion to them. Unearth is mainly used in situations where I will let Gix go to the graveyard instead of the command zone, then use Unearth to avoid having to pay a big commander tax. To be perfectly clear, I don't consider disruptors the same as stacks pieces, though some of them can be. For example, I run Opposition Agent and Creeping Bloodsucker. Both provide persistent effects, but Opposition Agent hinders my opponent. Creeping Bloodsucker just advances my own position. The Brothers Grimm, Grim Harrowspecs, and Grim Hireling provide card draw when your creatures die and treasures when your creatures deal combat damage. Cryptghast provides a one-sided mana flare and another source of extort. Starscream, the Seeker Leader side, can introduce the Monarch to the game. Then Starscream, the power-hungry side, can turn your Gix draws into serious life loss for your opponents. Gixian Puppeteer can recoup some of the constant life you'll be losing from Gix, plus he's Gixian, which is basically Gixish, so you should put it in Gix decks. Braid's Arisen Nightmare is something I'm testing out and it's working sometimes. I find myself sacrificing lands fairly often, especially when I'm flooding. Necropotence is one of the reasons I even made a mono black deck to begin with, and was kind of the inspiration for this whole video. Skullclamp is really good when you have lots of tiny creatures, so it makes the cut here. Village Rites is a fine response to one of your creatures being killed, plus I have the foiled Japanese Strixhaven version. Man, that looks nice. Predator's Hour gives all your creatures evasion, and you can get a lot of pseudo card draw from it from everyone else's deck. It can also be used in cases where an Alpha Strike is lethal. Expedition Map lets you tutor for the very powerful lands you can run in mono black. Cabal Coffers is the top of my list for this. The deck also runs Cabal Stronghold as a Cabal Coffers 2. It runs Urborg Term of Yawgmoth to power up both the Cabal lands. War Room is kind of an emergency grab in situations where you might have stalled out or just need to find an answer. Speaking of tutors, I also run Vampiric Tutor, Grim Tutor, and Demonic Tutor. I don't generally like tutors in Commander, especially tutors that go and get anything. Feels like they just kind of defeat half the point of Commander, but another part of the reason of building this deck was just to have a place to put all these powerful tutors, so here they are. What's left are the cards that I consider win cons, either in one-shot or over time. Grey Merchant of Asphodel can one-shot the table, or just take off a sizable chunk of everyone's life, while replenishing your life for more Necropotence or Gix activations. Bolas's Citadel can also just provide you enough advantage to outright win the game, or can team with an Aetherflux Reservoir to actually start nuking people. Exsanguinate and Torment of Hailfire can take advantage of the large amount of mana you can generate between Cryptghast, Cabal Coffers, and Cabal Stronghold. Psychosis Crawler and Throne of the God Pharaoh both utilize you sending lots of creatures into the red zone, either tapping them for Throne or drawing lots of cards through Gix. Vorpal Sword rounds out the win cons as a cheeky way to equip onto evasive dummies and poke someone to death. I run a handful of utility lands, and these can vary from deck to deck. Reliquary Tower is nice to have since you'll often reach or exceed the hand size limit with Gix. Castle Lochthwain is okay, but really more of an emergency clause. Most of the time you'll have lots of cards in your hand. You may just want to replace this with a basic swamp. Bajuka Bog is some of my limited graveyard removal. Try to save it until you need it. Shizo Death Storehouse can slap fear on your Gix to get another evasive creature. Witch's Cottage is fine, and it does count as a swamp for the Cabal lands. It will usually enter untapped. Plus, the foil version looks gorgeous. Then we finish off the deck with about 24 basic swamps. I choose foil basic swamps from Kaldheim by Piotr Dura, who is fast becoming one of my favorite artists in Magic. The first couple turns for this deck are pretty simple. Turn 1, evasive creature. Turn 2, 1/2 evasive creatures. Turn 3 Gix, and then swing with those evasive creatures. Draw 2 to 3 cards. From there you can further strategize how to proceed. Did you get a tutor? Maybe start angling for a quick win. Did you get a bunch of interaction? Hunker down and keep digging. Play the control game. Fast mana, roll the dice and go for a slot machine win with Gix's second ability. This deck is really fast and powerful, but it does have a few weaknesses. Being mono black means it's fairly weak to artifacts and enchantments. If you're concerned about that sort of thing, you can try running Oblivion Stone or my personal choice, Navinural's Disc, just like I ran back in the summer of '96. This is by no means the final version of this deck. No version of a deck is. I look at every deck as a new starting point. Feel free to add or remove cards as you see fit, or just take a few ideas and incorporate it into your own style of deck. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to thank me for making the video, feel free to like the video and subscribe if you want to. If you want to see how I would generally build a commander deck around Rasputin the Oneromancer, click here.